Welcome to Jim White's webinar series. Jim has been investing, coaching executives, and turning around companies for over 30 years. Now your host, Dr. Jim White.
Hello, this is Jim White. It is July the 14th, 2020, and welcome to part 10 of my critical thinking series. Can you believe part 10? We got 2 more sessions, and we will conclude this series. So, as always, let's do a quick review before we get into this week's session. Is see what we did last week, and we'll just do a highlight. Last week we discussed problem solving. We really we touched that a couple of times during the past 9 or 10 weeks. So we discussed problem solving, and then we talked about identifying inconsistencies in the critical thinking process. And then we talked about trust your instincts, and we spent some time on that, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about that this evening as well. And then we talked about the importance of asking why, right? Asking why. And then we talked about evaluate the solution, right? When you go through all the critical process and then you come down where you evaluate the solution. So this week, and before we get into this week, let's start off this way. We've learned many new skills for the logic and critical thinking. We've learned a lot of skills over the past 9 weeks, and now we need to learn how to combine all of these new skills, right? We need to learn how to combine them. And a skill is, this without me having to tell you, but a skill is only beneficial if it's easy to apply, right? It's only beneficial if it's easy to apply. Now, in this session, we're going to discuss how to, and that's very important as you go forward in your critical thinking, problem solving methodology. Always start with the how to. So this week we're going to talk about how to retain your new skills, right? How to retain your new skills. And we're going to talk about reflect. I'm going to talk about reflect and learn from your mistakes. Now, that is a big deal, right? And you know my words by now. And before I go forward, I want to thank everybody that has been joining us. And we've had people to join each and every week. So we really appreciate you. We appreciate you tuning in. And like I said, we only do this for one reason, is to help give you tools that's going to help you in your personal and professional life. So that's the reason we do this each and every week. So we're going to talk about that, how to retain your new skills. We're going to talk about reflect and learn from mistakes. And we're going to talk about practical critical thinking, practice critical thinking. And we're going to talk about always ask the rich question. So once again, we're going to review how to retain your new skills, reflect and learn from mistakes, always ask the rich questions, and practice critical thinking. So that's the 4 things that we're going to get in 30 minutes this evening. So a lot of information, and we're going to try a couple things new, and I'm going to ask for your participation. And in preparation for that, if you don't have a pen and pad or whatever other device, I'd ask you to do so because we go through. We're going to do some role play. We're going to do some virtual. See how we can do role play virtual. And I am going to be visualizing each and every one of you in a big open setting, right? I'm looking out. We're looking out on this beautiful group of people that's come together. So as we go through, I'm going to be have that visualization in mind as we work a couple of exercises, and I hope it translates here. So we'll see what we can do. So let's get right to it. Now, retaining your new skills. As I said, now that we have learned many new critical thinking skills, our next challenge is to retain these things, right? And you already been busted You heard me. I'm going to repeat myself a couple times, and you that follow me regularly, you know that I do that for a point. So there are many methods to help you retain your new critical thinking skills. And one is we've learned the word schema. Developing a schema for organizing and remembering information is one method, right? That is one method. The subject of critical thinking and metacognition, that's simply put thinking about thinking, right? Big old word just to simply say thinking about thinking. The most effective technique to help you retain and improve your critical thinking skills, however, is for you to practice them regularly. And that's what I'm going to attempt to, I use that word, which I don't use very often, to demonstrate this evening. So, at that, let's do a virtual exercise here. Okay, visualize we're in a room, and I'm going to ask you to come up to the front of the room. Right now, if you got a pen and paper at home, just do it at home. Let's do it together, right? And we're going to do an exercise. And I'm going to ask you right now to write down on a piece of paper, and we're in our virtual conference room. Write down on a piece of paper a list a method to help you retain. You know, your method. It belongs to you, right? So you'd write that down, and that you would belong to you. Now, so okay, you've got it written down. We've got it on a piece of paper, right? We got it written down, and then we're going to review those, right? So if we were as a group, we'd be reviewing them, and I've created some possible answers that hopefully you included. If not, maybe we'll give you some ideas how to think about it. So what's our exercise here? Write down a list a method to help you retain information, right? Our new skills, right? So some of the possible ways and the ways that I have used over the years to help retain new skills is keep learning more about the skill. In this case, keep learning more about critical thinking. Keep learning more about critical thinking. And the other item that you could have written down would have been learn more about how you think, your thinking process. Learn more about how you think. And another thing that I would have added to my list is learn more about how the mind processes information. And the last thing I just wrote down, got 4 of them here, and teach someone else how to be a critical thinker. So a lot of times becoming a teacher is reinforcing your skills. It's a very powerful way. And a lot of the folks in our audience, your educators, I can tell by some of your questions and feedback we get. So you know this. So we're talking about how to start retaining, because we don't want to spend 9 weeks of our time, right, and learn these new skills, and especially critical thinking, and especially in this day and age, right? My goodness, we need everybody to start thinking critically, starting from Washington, all of our politicians, our business leaders, our nonprofits, our clergy, everybody on the globe. We've got to start thinking critically, critical thinking, right? So metacognition is, as I said earlier, is simply a buzzword in psychology that literally means thinking about thinking, right? Literally, I don't know why it is in our studies that we want to be able to use what I call $100 words, and where we can just make it pretty simple. So metacognition is thinking about thinking. I do that all the time. When I'm looking, I'm reflecting, don't get ahead of myself here a little bit, which I have a tendency to do on occasion. So I want to make sure that we understand thinking about thinking. It has not, and that really, let me say this. Metacognition has not been widely studied that deep, that has not been widely studied cross-culturally, right? So researchers are not clear about the impact of cultural differences when you're thinking about in a metacognition and thinking about thinking. However, and some of our colleagues, some of our psychologists suggest that metacognition is a human survival tool. And I agree with that. Thinking about thinking, and you're going to think about what you're going to think about, if you will, is a human survival skill. So that would make the same across all cultures. And that's probably another 12-week session within itself to talk about cultures and how different cultures learn and that. But the same, we got brain, and we're talking about methods to learn and retain the information. Now, let's talk about reflect and learn from mistakes. That's a big one. Reflect and learn from mistakes. Reflection is a useful step in the logic process. I was sharing with my wife this morning, sometimes I'm just taking some quiet time. I am looking in the mirror, and especially I may be shaving in the morning, and I'm that reflection time, just to be reflecting on the previous day or reflecting on the upcoming day. But reflecting and learning from mistakes, that is a big deal. We're human. We're going to make mistakes, but we got to learn from those mistakes. And that's one of the challenges that that I'm really challenged with right now with a lot of our staff and a lot of our different companies. We seem like of recent we've just been making the same mistakes over and over and over and over, and we're not learning from them. So we're going to make mistakes as human beings, but we got to reflect on those mistakes. So when you go home, whatever your area of comfort is, when you're doing your detox, you need to reflect. You need to have some downtime and to reflect about your day. What was good and what was not so good. And I'm going to dig down on that a little bit more. So reflecting and learning from mistakes is also very, very important part of critical thinking. Now, you may not be able to reflect every time you engage in your critical thinking skills, but practice and mastery. We've used the word mastery, right? And just I'm just going to suggest I'll be careful with the word all. Suggest that mastery and most people who say mastery is about 10,000 hours, right? To be able to master something. So whenever possible, reflect back on the steps taken to come to a major decision. So, and that's what I said, stop and think, right? Stop and think. And I'm an old aviator, general aviation, and we often say, always stay out in front of the airplane. And when I was training for some aerobatics, I did for a while, and my instructor was always telling me that I got to be thinking 20 or 40 miles ahead, right? And all of the things I need to do if I'm coming in for a landing or coming off of a routine, I got to be thinking ahead because you're doing 280 miles an hour and at 12,000 feet, and you're dropping pretty fast. So you got to be thinking ahead. What are you going to do in order to come out of that dive, right? So thinking, reflect back on the steps taken to come to a major decision. Now, I could really go down a rabbit hole here. I'm going to be very careful and try not to. But critical thinking today, in particular with leaders, and I'm going to use the word managers, and I'm going to say as parents, we should regularly reflect on how we all interact with our employees, our peers, our supervisors, our directors, our family members, everybody. But at the same time, when you're doing that reflection and how you're fit, if they are down here and have no point of reference when you're talking about critical thinking and have not taken the time to continue to advance their skills, Well, it can get a little frustrating, if you will, if you got a huge gap, right? I think I mentioned before, if you're in no disrespect to anyone, but there is such a thing that people at different levels, because a lot of people just decide to stop learning, right? They don't want to learn new skills for many reasons. Well, it may be too hard. It may take too much work, or maybe it's going to take away from my beer or whatever it is at night, right? So learning new skills, and especially critical thinking. I cannot stress this enough. Spending some time on continuing to develop these skills is going to add dollars to your pocketbook. It will. It just will. But it's going to take some time, right? Now, let's do another thing from our little virtual exercise. Just visualize we're together. I'm going to the butcher paper, and I am going to write down, and I would ask you to do the same. Write down some reflections, things that what you could reflect on. And I wrote down is learn from my mistakes. And another one that you want to reflect on, and remember we did back in session 7, I think it was, where we introduced you to the SWOT analysis, right? Where we talked about the strengths and weaknesses. That's something that I do all the time. I often take a pad, and it's a white pad here, and I'm always quadrants, and I'm always writing those things down. I'm 71 years old, and I'm not stopped. I am not through learning. I am just beginning. So this critical thinking process is a big deal. And I always want to reflect on my strengths and my weaknesses, right? It's a big deal. Now, another thing that I'm going to look at is to understand the critical thinking process better. That's all the things that we've been talking about for the past 9 weeks. And this session here at 10 is what I call beginning to kind of wrap it up a little bit and bring it all together. So understand the critical thinking process, because this process is got to become automatic, right? The more you do it, it's just like when you're beginning to maybe you're a musician. You know how awkward it is. You first started playing, and you're playing from the sheet music, if you will. Then all of a sudden, practice, and it becomes second nature. It's the same thing with our brain and this critical thinking process. Practice, and the better you get at it, will add value to your pocketbook. Now, identify different ways to solve a problem. Well, we laid out, and I think it's session 7 as well, different triage way to solve a problem, and break it down into manageable pieces, right? So I thought about this afternoon when we're talking about this critical thinking, and I want to share this story, and it's probably not going to be verbatim, but I'll see how close I can get. But the majority of us remember 2008, right? Well, in 2008, there was a health study that was undertaken, and it revealed, and it was on the medical errors, and this study revealed that it cost the U.S. economy $19.5 billion, okay, because of the errors. This is going to sound, I remember the study, you know, especially now in this COVID period and our assisted living and the most vulnerable on this COVID time. Such errors of people getting in bed and not being turned, and cold sores, infection, medication errors, and on and on and on. Well, and that's no different in all industries. And I can absolutely, there's trillions of dollars wasted in the economy on an annual basis because of lack of critical thinking and a lack of this proper decision making, understand how to do that. So it is absolutely critical that, in my mind, that we really continue to work on this critical thinking. And I made no secret about my displeasure with all of our politicians, regardless of what side of the line you're on, and the danger that I believe the United States is in right now. It really bothers me. It really bothers me as a veteran, as an American. I love our country. I really love it. And I'm concerned, and I'm saying to all of the people that will listen. And one of the things that we have coming up is going to be not intended to be a plug, but probably look that way. But I have another book that I'm going to be releasing, and it's the next big thing in politics, and it's going to be 10 Guiding Principles to Restore America's Greatness. Well, I wrote this book, and it's based on the Constitution and 10 things that I believe that if we could start adopting across the board, that it would start putting us back on a better track than we are right now. So we're going to be releasing that on September the 9th, and we're going to start a series after that on the release date where we hopefully can get a lot of energy behind it, and I hope you can support us in that. And it's all about trying to bring more civility in our discourse in the United States. So I hope you can be around for that, because we are going to start. I'm looking forward to that series. I'm going to be bringing different guests on. We're going to be talking. So and give us your feedback on that. If you'd like to see more of that, just let us know. Now, I need to keep moving here because I just noticed the time at the corner of my eye. And the next thing we need to talk about is to always ask questions, right? The importance of being inquisitive cannot be overemphasized enough, if I can talk. The importance of being inquisitive cannot be overemphasized in the process of critical thinking. Now, one contribution to civilization that Socrates made was that he advocated the questioning process during debate. Okay. Furthermore, learning is a process sparked by the desire to know more. Man, I am so inquisitive. I am curious. I have always been that way. So, learning is a process sparked by the desire to know more. Big deal. And I hope every person watching live and maybe watching the replay that really understand. We've got to learn these skills, right? The more inquisitive you are and the more curious you are, and to me, that is the foundation of learning. Being inquisitive and being curious. That is the first desire and the foundation of learning, right? And we all know that as parents. We know our toddlers that are born, and so we're always trying to get them started early, right? Now, some questions that lead to possible solution paths ultimately answers the following. So here we go again. Work with me one more time here, and we may go over a few minutes. So we'll see. I don't want to rush this, but we may. So if we do, my apology, and bear with us, okay? So what I would do if we were in a room together and ask you that, we'd do some brainstorming. I'd say take about 5 minutes and list as many generic questions as you can on a piece of paper. Generic question, and I'm going to go through an exercise here. Remember, generic questions can always apply, because what we're talking about here, the subject matter, what we're talking about here is the ability to always ask questions, right? So that's what we're talking about. So you got to learn how to ask questions, and there's a process of learning how to ask questions. And there are some very generic questions that will serve you well in any condition, such as ask the question, examples of generic questions. What is the example of X, right? What is the example of that if you're talking about? What is the example of that? And ask for it. That's the question you have. And another question would come to mind. How could blank be used to do what? How could this be used to do what? Always generic questions. And a lot of you PhD folks and probably say, yeah, we get that, Jim. Well, it is, once again, a reminder for everybody and how we use these tools to benefit us, right? Now, here's two more that I'm going to share that what would happen if? I always ask, what would happen if what would happen? And I go around and I tell my staff, and when we actually had the days where we're a platform and we're speaking, I'd always say, I do a scan, I go through the day, and I'm always asking myself, what's happening and what's not happening in my business, right? What's happening and what's not happening. And another question that's a good generic question, how do you think Joey would see the issue? How do you think some other person would see the issue? How do you think? So it depends what it is. So these are just some examples of some generic questions that you could use. Now, we also know that being able to ask these questions, and the more that we practice in school, the students become more accustomed to asking questions. The higher level of questions they've asked, the more that they are advanced. We know this to be, and how they take on new situations, right? We know this to be the case, right? Now, the fourth thing that we're going to talk about in the 5 minutes we have remaining here is called practicing critical thinking. We've been talking about that for the pretty much for the past 25 minutes, right? Practice critical thinking. The best way to improve your critical thinking skills is to practice. That's the reason I ventured into this virtual reality conference room for us to work together to be able to put these questions out there. And I encourage you to continue to practice. Get your partner, get your kids, anyone, to make a game out of this, right? So it's going to start the brain asking questions for the critical thinking. Now, developing ways to remember this whole process. And as we talked about earlier, the schema, right? Schema is just strictly how you organize information. You got to learn how to organize information, chunks of information. You cannot solve a big old problem by just what I call binary. You got to break it down in chunks, and you got to be able to organize information in an effective way that's going to stick with you. Practice. Now, upon that whole process, remember, try to improve critical thinking and creative thinking, as these two types of thinking support each other. Okay, critical thinking and creative thinking. It's very interesting. Two different things, very important. I probably need about another 40 minutes on that, or an hour on the two, right? But we don't have it this evening. But we'll probably visit a little bit more next week, talk about it a little bit more. It's really critical, and it just dawned on me how critical that was when I was making my notes or outline what I wanted to do this evening. So the critical thinking and the creative thinking is processes really support each other. In this whole thinking process, you've got to be able to use your senses, right? Using all your senses. You've got to be able to use synergy, pulling together the parts that appear to be separate into functional wholes, and separating big pieces into parts, if you will. Then there's such a thing as, we all know, serendipity, right? A chance happening, and that happens a lot. It happens a lot to me, where I have some serendipity that's just chance happening, that this may just come out in front of me, right? Just appear, right? And part of that critical thinking process, a lot of times I will wake up in the middle of the night, my brain will be open, especially when I'm writing. I'll have to go to my computer, and I will, and my wife knows this. I jump out of bed, and I go to my computer, and I will just fake. So it just happened, and those serendipity. Now, I know through a lot of the behavioral work that we do, a special mark of the creative person is to find problems to solve. Creative people got to be very creative. They're looking for solutions. The creative individual tends to notice an aspect in the environment or issue that maybe the rest of us will overlook. They are open-minded, and that's when I have ground rules that I lay out. And some people, it makes their hair stand up on the back of the neck when I talk about ground rules. But one of the ground rules I always have, and I'm going to speak in it, and I'm doing staff meetings or meetings, what we call in our company called goal and control process. I said the first ground rule: have an open mind. You got to open that mind. And unfortunately, the things that will kind of frustrate me a little bit, if you will, where people are not trying to learn, they're not trying to develop skills, they're not trying to get better. I don't understand why anybody would refuse an opportunity to learn if it's going to help them to create a better quality of life for themselves and their family. I don't get it. So this is a process that we need to do. Have an open mind, and because we always have a place for whatever your ethnic background or where we are on this earth. So that was fast. I hope it all worked, but I'll probably hear about it. But I hope it all worked. Next week, 7/21, we're going to start wrapping it up. We're going to start bringing it all together. So our sessions are, like I said, coming to a close. But I hope this just becomes the beginning of your journey to improve your critical thinking skills. You know, it's just the beginning, right? So what I would encourage you to do for next week, do a little homework, right? Start putting together an action plan that you might want to accomplish. And like I said, this COVID-19, she continues to raise her ugly head. We got to be mindful. We got to be mindful of each other. We have got to protect each other. We have got to slow the curve. This thing is out of control right now. And it's the universe is sending us a signal, right? So create an action plan to be able what you want to do, maybe a goal or a new career, and start using some of these tools to help you start going down that road, right? And then our last session on 7/28, we will close with a high-level review, and then we will decide what we do next, right? But we are going to, on September the 9th, on the release, we're going to start a whole new series, and we may do something in between. I'm not quite sure yet due to my schedule, but we want to keep this series going if that's something that you would support us on. And we may ask some of the survey and get some feedback and see what you'd like to see in the future. So at that, I'm going to say thank you. I really appreciate each and every person from wherever you may be. I want you to be safe. And until next week, good night.
Thank you for your participation and interest in Jim White's webinar series. To stay in touch with Jim, go to www.authorjimwhite.com.